This guide covers all the actions Dawntrail Sage learns from level 70 to 100 in order. We go over how each action is meant to be used and recommend ways to use it when relevant. We start with a tutorial on how to play Sage at level 70, and then, as we work our way to level 100, go over how to make the most of every action the job learns on its way to level 100. In the final summary, at level 100, we outline an optimized opener and explain how it leads into the general attack rotation alongside 2-minute burst considerations. We also go on to outline specific advice for dungeons and raids, and also touch on the stat priorities of the Sage. I also have videos on more general healing advice, more details on things like the global cooldown and more, with links in the description to all of these for those that want to learn even more. Now then, let's begin with the 2 signature mechanics of the Sage, beginning with Eukrasia. This is a spell that uniquely only has a single second recast timer that changes the effect of 3, later 4, other spells in your arsenal. We will cover these spells in their respective sections, although an interesting aspect is that all of them have recast timers of 1.5. Additionally, both Eukrasia and these spells are unaffected by spell speed, which means that the combination of Eukrasia and the follow-up spell has a combined recast timer of 2.5. Take note that due to animation locking, you cannot weave anything after Eukrasia and only weave a single ability after the follow-up spell. The other major mechanic of the Sage, Kardia, is an ability that you can use very regularly, which designates the target player as a receiver, gaining the Kardion buff, and you as the giver with the Kardia buff. Every time you use any of your damaging spells, your Kardion will be healed for a reasonable amount. Keep in mind that the cooldown of Kardia allows you to move around your Kardion very often if you wish. This can be very helpful if someone has taken a large amount of damage and you don't have the excess resources to heal them back up. Assuming, of course, the next attack is coming far enough into the future that you can heal them up in time. While you're still learning the job, I highly recommend just placing Kardion on your main tank and leave it there. Next, let's talk about your attacking spells. While all of your attacking spells explicitly state that they heal your Kardion, this is not actually a requirement to activate Kardion, as if you have access to other attacking spells, most of the time, these will also activate Kardion regardless. Doses is your basic attack spell that simply does some damage to an enemy. When empowered by Eukrasia, it turns into a Eukrasian doses, which is instant and applies a damage over time effect, DOT for short, which does slightly more damage. The enemy needs to survive for at least 24 seconds before Eukrasian doses is superior to regular doses. Keep in mind that the cast times and animation locking of both doses and Eukrasian doses are just so that you can fit a single ability between casts, which is known as single weaving. As a healer, the concept of weaving is crucially important to master, as it is the way you find time to cast healing without stopping your attack, and in some cases allow you to fit spell heals and ability heals in between each other. If you want to learn a bit more about these concepts, I refer you to the extra learning material videos in the description. Next, Dyskrasia does instant damage in an area of effect around you, AoE for short. This spell is superior to doses on 2 targets and Eukrasian doses on 3 or more targets, even if Eukrasian doses lasts its full duration. As Dyskrasia is instant, it also allows you to fit 2 abilities between casts while using it. Pneuma is a powerful attack with an unusually short range, and it does both great single target and AoE damage. You can hold up to 2 charges at a time, and you should use these, as it is your strongest attack spell, regardless of the number of targets present. On a single target, keeping your dot up at all times is a larger damage gain than using Pneuma immediately. On AoE, Pneuma deals more damage than Dyskrasia, so delaying it until all the enemies are clumped up together lets you get the most value out of Pneuma. In single target fights, you can also use Pneuma as an instant attack to use on the move if you need it. You should try to use at least one Pneuma so the cooldown is always ticking. Besides this, you can choose to keep the other charge for movement reasons or for when your party chooses to use damage buffs. You can also use it immediately if you prefer. Toxicon is another instant attack spell, and while it is instant and even has AoE components and range, it does less damage than doses, so you should only use it for movement in single target fights, if it is not a convenient time to do other instant spell options, like reapplying Eukrasian doses. For AoE, Toxicon is better than Dyskrasia on 2 or 3 targets. To use Toxicon, you need a resource called Addersgall. This is produced by the 2 Eukrasian healing spells that I will get to in a bit. The main thing to keep in mind is that it is not worth it damage-wise to generate adder stings, and that it should be considered a side bonus of a spell you wanted to use anyway. Next, we move on to your healing spells. First, Diagnosis is a regular heal. It does about 3 times the healing of Kardia and is cheap. While empowered by Eukrasia, it turns into Eukrasian Diagnosis, which heals for slightly less than Diagnosis, but also applies a shield for a percentage of the healing amount. It is also instant, unlike regular Diagnosis. When it critically heals, it applies an additional equally as large shield, vastly increasing the value of the spell. Assuming the shield is fully spent from damage, Eukrasian Diagnosis is far stronger than Diagnosis, and also happens to be instant as I mentioned. The fact that Eukrasian Diagnosis is significantly more expensive is usually not a problem when not using it excessively. If the shield is fully consumed by damage, Eukrasian Diagnosis will also grant you an adder sting to use on Toxicon. The regular shield is always spent first before the critical heal shield, and the critical heal shield will not grant an additional adder sting. Keep in mind that using Eukrasian Diagnosis for the express purpose of generating adder stings is not really worth it in combat, as casting Eukrasian Diagnosis, being a spell, comes at the cost of an attack spell. This should not deter you from using this spell for its healing or shielding components, however. And should you desire multiple adder stings as you walk up to a boss room, you can apply these shields to multiple players to possibly generate multiple adder stings from an early raid-wide attack. In a desperate situation, sometimes it can help to alternate between Eukrasian Diagnosis and regular Diagnosis for focused tank healing. This is to make sure the shield is spent before you apply another one. Sometimes just spamming Eukrasian Diagnosis also works. Prognosis is a simple AoE heal. When empowered by Eukrasia, it turns into Eukrasian Prognosis, which heals for significantly less, but also applies a shield to all targets, and similar to Eukrasian Diagnosis, is also instant. In terms of total value, Eukrasian Prognosis is only slightly more powerful at this level. Additionally, if the shield applied to yourself is consumed by damage, then you will gain an adder sting. In group content with multiple healers, it is worth keeping in mind that scholars can apply a shield known as Galvanize, which is mutually exclusive with both your Eukrasian Diagnosis and Prognosis shields. So, in these cases, it may be worthwhile to check if your team already has a shield before applying one. For extra clarity, one player can only have either Eukrasian Prognosis, Galvanize, or Eukrasian Diagnosis on them. Next, Pepsis on a 30-second cooldown allows you to consume all the Eukrasian shields you applied from nearby allies to heal each individual for a fixed potency regardless of how much shield is left. The healing amount depends on which kind of shield was consumed, and Eukrasian Diagnosis or Prognosis combined with Pepsis is always superior to the non-Eukrasian variants. Take note that Pepsis will not result in gaining any adder stings. Due to the presence of Pepsis, it is generally recommended to not use regular Diagnosis or Prognosis outside of desperate measures, as if you needed more healing, adding Pepsis is more effective anyway. With quick reactions, you can even apply shields, weave Pepsis, and immediately apply more shields if needed. The game will report that you missed Pepsis on targets without an applicable shield, and this is not uncommon to see if you attempted to use Pepsis for healing the tank and were a little slow, so the shield sometimes gets consumed by a simple auto attack before you can use it. Now we move on to Addersgall. Every 20 seconds, in or out of combat, you generate 1 Addersgall, and you can hold up to 3. Spending Addersgall always has the side effect of recovering 7% of your MP. Now, let's have a look at the abilities that spend it. Kerachole is a simple instant heal, uniquely with no cooldown amongst these abilities. If you need to quickly heal someone a lot, you can use Kerachole, but in most cases, your other options are superior, and finding other ways to heal someone so you don't spend all your Addersgall just like that may be beneficial. Kerachole is a simple instant AoE heal on a 30-second cooldown, and is more valuable than Kerachole if at least 2 targets get full value out of it. Kerachole adds damage reduction to all party members in an area around you on a 30-second cooldown. If you have the Addersgall in excess to use it, it is a great option when expecting raid-wide damage. You can also use it to help the tank mitigate damage, however, remember that it comes at the cost of not having the Addersgall for, say, Eukrasian instead. And finally, Eukrasian is a single target ability that combines the effect of Eukrasian and Kerachole, instant healing and damage reduction, but on a 45-second cooldown. Take note that the damage reduction of Eukrasian does not stack with the damage reduction from Kerachole, so try to make sure these don't overlap. Do your best to manage these 4 options. I recommend maximizing the duration of the damage reduction effect on your tank in large AoE pools by alternating Kerachole and Eukrasian as much as possible, and then keeping any reserve Addersgall after that for Ixachole or Eukrasian when you need it. Remember, even if Kerachole itself offers no healing, reducing the damage your tank takes means that Kardia can more realistically deliver the healing necessary. Do make sure to use some Addersgall in general, as they are a large source of your MP regeneration, aside from lucid dreaming and passive regeneration. Now we move on to your other ability cooldowns. FFXIV is an instant AoE on a 60-second cooldown that applies a heal over time effect, hot for short, to everyone in your party. It also applies a healing potency increase for a portion of its duration, meaning that if you plan to do a lot of healing in a short time span, leading with FFXIV can be very beneficial. Due to the potency of this ability combined with its cooldown, you can absolutely use it even just to heal the tank, so make sure to use it regularly. Some clarifications to avoid confusion. FFXIV automatically upgrades into FFXIV. Furthermore, FFXIV's healing increasing effect does not apply to itself. I have a separate video demonstrating this, link in the description. Soteria is a cooldown that increases the effect of your Kardia by 70% for 4 casts within 15 seconds. Due to the somewhat low power, I recommend using Soteria quite aggressively if your Kardia target can benefit from the healing at all. You can also use it to heal, say, a damage dealer that messed up a mechanic by moving Kardia to them and then using Soteria. Zoe increases the potency of your next healing spell by 50%. This means diagnosis, prognosis, and their Eukrasian variants. In the best case scenario, you won't have to use many regular healing spells, so try to use this as best you can whenever it is available and you have to or want to use a regular healing spell. One good example is to use Zoe with Eukrasian diagnosis just before the tank pulls, or prognosis before the raid pulls. Take note that Pepsis will not heal for more based on a Zoe boosted shield. As Zoe is only spent on healing spells, you can use Zoe way in advance while continuing your attack if you know you're going to spend it. Pneuma, on a 2-minute cooldown, applies a buff to your target. This buff immediately applies a shield to them and gives them 5 charges. Whenever the shield breaks, a charge is spent to apply another shield, leading to a maximum of 6 shields. If the initial buff runs out with any charges left, it instead heals the target for half the potency it would have shielded for, per charge. As long as you use Pneuma on a target that will take continuous damage, it will in most cases be well spent. The multi-shielding effect means that it will smooth out damage rather than block all damage entirely. In dungeons, I recommend using Pneuma on AoE pulls once the tank reaches their destination. Finally, Icarus immediately dashes you to any party member or enemy of your choice. This can be helpful for dodging out of attacks or moving in close for Dyskrasia or Phlegma casts. Don't forget about this action, as it is incredibly helpful. Now, let's briefly go over important role actions. Hegiro is the Sage Raise spell, and as usual has a long cast time and high MP cost, so make sure to use it alongside Swift Cast. Lucid Dreaming causes you to recover nearly 4000 MP over its duration. I recommend using it if you go below 8000 MP. Do not save it for when you're almost out of MP. It is better to use it on cooldown. Surecast can be used to prevent knockbacks, and Rescue can be used to grab a party member to your location. Take note, it moves them rather slowly, so make sure to use it early if you want to help. Repose can be used to sleep a single enemy, although this is a very niche effect that you may rarely ever need. Ishuna allows you to remove removable debuffs, which can be identified by the blue line over the debuff. You should make time to use this spell on dangerous or particularly annoying or inconvenient debuffs, such as Doom, Heavy, movement speed slow, and Slow, attack speed slow, not to mention Paralysis. With that, let's finish up the introduction with an attack rotation, followed by talking about some of the best ways to make use of your healing options. First, I need to underline that, as a healer, making sure your party is alive takes priority over doing damage, although as a sage, doing damage does directly heal someone, so don't forget about attacking. For single target combat, apply Eukrasian diagnosis to the tank or Eukrasian prognosis to the raid, and then start by precasting doses as the tank is about to pull. Then, as you make your way to the target, use Eukrasian doses followed by Phlegma up to twice in a row. Alternatively, you can cast doses a few times if you expect party members to use any raid buffs, so Phlegma lines up with these. After that, you simply cast doses repeatedly, reapplying Eukrasian doses and using Phlegma to make sure it doesn't fully recharge. Remember, you can save a Phlegma charge from moving. For 2 or more targets, apply Eukrasian diagnosis, preferably before the tank starts pulling, and then apply Eukrasian doses to enemies until 3 are closely enough stacked that Dyskrasia can hit all 3, after which you use this repeatedly. For healing, remember in a boss fight, you typically will want to adjust your cooldown usage based on what the fight calls for, so for these, I would refer to the more general suggestions I recommended earlier. But for AoE pulls, you can somewhat prepare orders of actions to systematically deal with encounters. Most dungeons are segmented as 4 packs, split in at least 2 pulls, followed by a boss, repeated 3 times. Typically, one such pull takes around 1 minute from start to finish, meaning 1 minute cooldowns used early should be available for the second pack, but anything longer tends to be only accessible on one of the pulls at a time. Let's split up this strategy in these 2 pulls. When the tank reaches their destination and enemies reach them, use Kerachole and Physis too. Once Kerachole runs out, use Tavrachole. You can wait a moment if the tank is healthy. For the first pull, add Haima, and for the second, add Soteria. As Tavrachole runs out, you can use Kerachole again. If you feel that Haima is unnecessary in the first pull, you can also swap the order. Remember that Zoe will be available for at least one of the pulls between bosses. For any additional healing beyond this, you will probably need to rely on Ryuchole and your regular healing spells alongside Pepsis, but casting healing spells during combat where you could be attacking should generally be considered a last resort, and you should only resort to this if it is your last option. With that, let's continue on past level 70. At level 72, your doses, Eukrasian doses and Phlegma are upgraded to doses 2, Eukrasian doses 2 and Phlegma 2. Additionally, Toxicon's potency is also increased significantly. The key difference is that Eukrasian doses 2 is better than Dyskrasia on 2 targets if it lasts 18 seconds and 3 targets if it lasts 27 seconds. Phlegma 2's damage is still so high that your relationship with this spell is completely unchanged. Toxicon's damage increase still means that it is weaker than doses 2, so I still recommend that you only use it for mobility reasons on single target. If you feel you have Adderstings to spare on AoE, then you can spend them for a damage gain. However, it is a very small gain, although there is a gain on up to 14 targets. While pulling in a dungeon context, you should apply Eukrasian doses to enemies until at least 4 enemies are close enough that you can hit them with Dyskrasia. At level 74, you learn the ability Rizomata, which immediately grants you an Addersgall. The most resource-effective way to use it is to use it on cooldown, of course, when you have space for the extra Addersgall. However, sometimes you simply won't need to spend that many Addersgall, and other times you certainly need a lot. For these reasons, I recommend you mainly use Rizomata if you're down to 0 Addersgall, or if you are at 1 and know you will need to use more shortly. At level 76, you learn the ability Holos, which does AoE healing and also applies a shield equal to the healing. It also reduces damage taken for 20 seconds, and this does indeed stack with the effect from Kerachole and Tavrachole. In AoE pulls, I recommend keeping Holos for if a fight drags on beyond the second Kerachole cast, to keep the damage reduction going. In a boss fight, Holos is extremely powerful for dealing with raid-wide damage, and for particularly large amounts, can be stacked with Kerachole. At level 78, Kerachole is upgraded to also apply a healing over time effect in addition to the damage reduction. This makes Kerachole do more healing over its duration than Ixachole, although it is over time. It also makes it better than Tavrachole if at least 2 players benefit from the healing. As such, due to their short cooldown and usefulness, you should try to use Kerachole as close to on cooldown as you can under a lot of circumstances. For boss fights, I recommend using Kerachole just before a large attack so that your party both benefits from the damage reduction and gets the most out of the healing effect. For AoE pulls, I recommend using Kerachole alongside Haima or Soteria to start, and then using Physis alongside Tavrachole afterwards, and then again using Kerachole alone after that. At level 80, you learn the ability Pneuma, assuming you completed the job quest line. Do your job quests. This is like an AoE version of Pneuma, although the potency is slightly lower. In AoE pulls, I recommend replacing Soteria with Pneuma for the second pull, meaning that you use Pneuma and Pneuma for one pull each. This means Soteria can be saved as an extra cooldown for when you need extra healing, rather than be part of the usual cooldown lineup. In boss fights, Pneuma can both be helpful for dealing with a single raid-wide hit, as the healing when the buff runs out can help recover afterwards. But if a raid-wide has multiple hits, then Pneuma can blunt all of the hits. To make the most of the healing from the remaining charges, you should make a point of not topping off everyone's HP as long as the buff lasts. Also, Pneuma and Pneuma stack. At level 82, Doses 2, Eukrasian 2, Phlegma 2, Dyskrasia and Toxicon are all upgraded one level up. And you unlock Eukrasian Dyskrasia. Dyskrasia is still better than Doses on 2 or more targets. Toxicon now deals the same damage as Doses on single target, meaning it is no longer a damage loss to use, but do make sure to use it for movement. It is also slightly better than Dyskrasia on AoE. Eukrasian Dyskrasia applies a dot to all nearby enemies that is mutually exclusive with Eukrasian Doses, so you cannot use both. If a fight will involve no more than exactly 3 targets, apply Eukrasian Doses to each enemy before resorting to Dyskrasia, or Doses on 1 or 2 targets. If more than 3 targets will be present, use Dyskrasia until all enemies are in range, after which use Eukrasian Dyskrasia. Because Toxicon does the same damage as Doses, you can, in a boss fight, use Eukrasia preemptively to save that 1 second, and then use Toxicon on pull instead of Doses, if you like. At level 85, the potencies of Diagnosis and Kardia are improved, and, at the same time, the shield sizes of Eukrasian Diagnosis and Prognosis are increased. This does not really change anything for your playstyle, but the Kardia heal in particular may make it significantly easier to keep a tank alive with it. At level 86, you learn the ability Krasis, which increases the healing received by a target for a bit. This can be useful for applying a large Eukrasian Diagnosis shield, or if your tank needs extra healing in general. For the sake of clarity, Kardia's healing is also increased by Krasis, so you can stack Soteria and Krasis together for a big passive healing boost if you wish. You will probably mainly be using Krasis on a tank, and you can also combine it with Zoe for a very large Eukrasian Diagnosis as your tank prepares to pull. At level 88, Zoe's cooldown is reduced to only 90 seconds. Due to its niche use, you should still consider using it whenever you plan to use a healing spell. Sometimes, using Zoe may be excessive though, so remember to keep Zoe for later if there's a bigger opportunity coming up shortly. In fact, I like to use Zoe for the level 90 spell when possible, even though their cooldowns don't always align. Speaking of which, at level 90 you learn the spell Pneuma, the signature laser cannon spell of the Sage. This does damage somewhat equivalent to Toxicon, slightly more AoE, on a cast time, so for the damage alone, this is technically a damage gain on AoE. As Pneuma does damage, it also activates Kardia. Pneuma also heals everyone for a massive amount, which is affected by Zoe as well. Take note that as Zoe is only activated by healing spells and has a 30-second duration, you can activate Zoe way in advance if you know that the next healing spell, or Pneuma, that you will use is within 30 seconds. This helps Zoe's cooldown to get ready again sooner. Also, this strategy is not always safe, however, for pulling bosses, just like with Toxicon, you could prepare Eukrasia beforehand and then precast Pneuma instead of a Doses, such that you can immediately follow up with Eukrasian Doses without the 1 second Eukrasia cast. Take note that this does in fact mean you're sacrificing all the defensive value of Pneuma for saving 1 second for attacking. On large AoE pulls, if you know you won't need Pneuma for the healing, you can use it after spending a Phlegma cast, as it will be worth a slight damage gain. Just make sure you don't actually end up needing it after that. At level 92, you learn the ability Psyche, which is an OGCD attack that does a ton of damage with an AoE component. Broadly speaking, use this on cooldown, like weave it on the first opportunity. In an AoE pull, hold it until all the mobs are bunched up, like with Eukrasian Dyskrasia. At level 94, Soteria's cooldown is reduced to 60 seconds. This changes nothing about how you use it, although you can use it even more aggressively. Swift cast cooldown is also reduced to 40 seconds, which also changes nothing directly for you. Finally, the potency of doses, Toxicon and Pneuma are increased, which notably means doses is stronger than Dyskrasia on up to 3 targets. Both Toxicon and Pneuma are also clearly stronger than Dyskrasia on AoE. At level 96, Eukrasian Prognosis permanently upgrades to Eukrasian Prognosis 2, making the shield it provides slightly larger. This changes nothing about how you use it. At level 98, Physis 2's healing increasing effect is upgraded to last 15 seconds instead of 10. This does not change how you use it. At level 100, you learn the ability Philosophia, which has a long cooldown, so it should be used when you really need it. Just make sure you don't treasure it so much you end up never using it. It increases healing done by spells for its duration, meaning it can be used to grant a bigger shield with Eukrasian Prognosis, for example. It also causes successfully casting any spell to heal all party members, a bit similar to Kardia, making it a strong option for maintaining healing over a period of time. Assuming you're casting as much as possible, Philosophia will heal more than any one of your other healing over time effects. Now, to round off, let's first talk about an opener for boss fights, general attack rotation advice, and the 2-minute burst in brief, followed by more general healing tips and advice to make the most of your tools in dungeons and raids. Finally, we briefly touch on stat priorities. For the opener, make sure before combat to apply Kardia to the main tank. Remember that you can always move Kardia to someone else that needs it. Then, up to 10 seconds before combat starts, you can use Eukrasia and then either Diagnosis or Prognosis depending on what the fight demands. If you're uncertain, use Prognosis. You can even add Diagnosis separately to the main tank. You can also add Zoe to this cast if you know you will not need it otherwise. Next, use Eukrasia so that it is ready. Then, if you intend to use a gem draft, use it 2 seconds before pull, and then 1.5 seconds before pull, cast either Pneuma or Toxicon depending on which one you need less, followed by Eukrasian doses. After that, cast doses 3 times, and then cast Pneuma, weaving Psyche and then Pneuma again. If you know there are no raid buffs in your party, or you cannot rely on them, you can also choose to cast 1 Pneuma immediately after applying your dot, and then save the other for movement or if raid buffs come up anyway. After that, cast doses until just before any damage buffs you benefit from are running out. Reapply Eukrasian doses here. After that, simply spam doses and maintain Eukrasian doses and weave Psyche on cooldown. Use Toxicon to keep up the attack when you have to move a lot. You can avoid needing to do this much by making extensive use of slide casting while casting doses, or by using Pneumas when you have to move. Sometimes, applying Eukrasian Prognosis or Diagnosis while you have to reposition can also be a good idea. If you are in a more coordinated raid team that does use raid cooldowns on time, take note that the cooldown of Pneuma allows you to fit 2 of them in the raid buffs every 2 minutes, leaving 1 extra for mobility in between. For healing tips, let's start with dungeon pulls, including the attacking part. Apply Eukrasian Diagnosis to the tank, preferably before they enter combat, and then use Sprint. Alternatively, you can use Sprint after the tank, just keep in mind that using Sprint before entering combat doubles its duration. Then spam Dyskrasia as you run with the pack of enemies. Try to rush up to the tank if you end up drawing aggro from anything as a result. When all the enemies are clumped together, use Eukrasian Dyskrasia, weave Psyche, and then use Pneuma. Assuming you won't need them, you can also use Toxicon and Pneuma for a damage gain. When the tank reaches their destination, apply Kerachole followed by either Pneuma or Pneuma. Yes, even though Pneuma is a party-wide effect. As Kerachole runs out, apply Physis and use Tavrachole to keep up healing over time and damage reduction. If the fight continues beyond this, use Kerachole again when it is available, and if it continues even further beyond this, use Holos. Krasis, Soteria, Zoe, Pneuma, Rizomata, Philosophia, and any excess Addersgall you may have are kept as backup in case something goes wrong, or to sprinkle in when you need a bit more. Don't forget you also have Pepsis if everything else fails. For boss fights, it is less clear-cut what you should do when. Generally, it is a good idea to use Kerachole whenever you see raid-wide damage incoming. Pneuma can be helpful to assist the tank with a tank buster a little bit. Pneuma and Holos can both be used for helping with raid-wide damage as well, where Pneuma stands out particularly well in attacks that hit multiple times back to back. Zoe and Pneuma are also super helpful for quickly bringing your raid up to safe HP amounts after a large raid-wide attack, or even to save just the tank if they're dangerously close to death. Philosophia can also both be used to prepare for a large raid wide with Eukrasian prognosis and also help with the healing afterwards. Often in particularly difficult boss fights, you will have to learn what you need to use when on a case-by-case basis. That is to say, using everything reactively can sometimes lead to you not having enough strong cooldowns for when something really big comes up. Try to plan out when to use what in hard content like Extremes, Savage and Ultimate. In fact, for certain Savage and Ultimate fights, using Zoe on Eukrasian prognosis often may be more helpful for a larger shield than, for example, sitting on Zoe for Nevma. Finally, regarding stat priorities. Take note that in nearly every single case, item level beats out optimal secondary stats. This means you should almost always prioritize gear with higher item level as long as it has mind on it. After this, Sage's stat priority is critical hit, then direct hit, then determination. And then dead last is spell speed. The reason that direct hit is prioritized slightly higher than determination is that, while direct hit does not actually boost your healing output, and determination does, the fact that healers never find direct hit on their gear naturally means that melding direct hit materia will be better for increasing your damage output. And the healing bonus determination does grant is not enough to affect your actual approach to combat at all. You will pretty much always still cast the exact same amount of healing spells in most situations. Notably, direct hit can also be stronger than critical hit for maximizing damage early on in an expansion. Spell speed allows you to cast more spells, but due to Phlegma, Psyche and any Eukrasian spells having very little to no benefit from speed, it is considered pretty awful for sages, to be blunt. Finally, Piety is a stat that increases healers' passive MP recovery in combat. However, it does not provide anything else, no damage or healing output increases. As such, you should only go for Piety if, after exhausting all your other options, you still find that you lack MP. If you are lacking MP despite using Lucid Dreaming on cooldown, spending your Addersgall as much as you can, and making the most of all of your cooldowns, then getting more Piety tends to take priority over everything else. However, as this is a more subjective stat, you will ultimately have to make this decision for yourself. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, if it wasn't for the simple fact that Eukrasian Dyskrasia is outright mutually exclusive with Eukrasian doses, there would be a benefit to maintaining this extra dot despite the awkwardness of having an extra dot to maintain that can only be applied in melee range. However, assuming the dot takes out fully, it would be about 11% stronger than a regular doses cast.